We're back with Jason Miller, who tells me that the president has just signed an emergency declaration for the flooding in Texas. So Trump is escalating his attacks on the media, calling its members sick people and demanding that CNN and New York Times reporters be fired or forced to give up their sources. Why is he ratcheting up these attacks?
Well, I think what you're seeing are years of abuse from the media towards people who are on the right side of the political aisle. Now, let's go back to 2016, Howie. How many years did we have to sit through the Russia drama? And by the way, reporters went and earned Pulitzer Prizes. They went and got big, huge headlines for these big scoops. And the whole thing turned out to be a scam. The whole thing was fake. Then as we went into 2020, we were told that Hunter Biden's laptop was fake. It was Russian disinformation. That somehow President Trump was maximizing something that some foreign adversary
Not everybody
was
said
forward.
that, but a lot of journalists did.
Many did.
Yes.
And then how many years, and I say years plural, Howie, did we sit through the media telling us that Joe Biden was as fit as a fiddle? And it wasn't until President Trump beat Joe Biden like he stole something in that debate last year that people realized that Joe Biden was actually mental mashed potatoes, that there was nothing there. And now actually the media goes and writes books about how brain damaged Joe Biden was. And they're making money off it after having criticized us for saying there's clearly something wrong with Joe Biden. So I believe that there is a bit of a snapback with regard to domestic culture, with people realizing that the media isn't always right. And look, President Trump is always going to play very tough. He's always going to call it the way that he sees it. And quite frankly, again, going back to the point that he won so overwhelmingly this past fall, I think that's a reflection of the American public looking and say, you know what, it's about time somebody stood up and called out the media when they're wrong.
So you're saying it's good politics for your side. Pete Hegseth says the media trying to undermine the success of the U.S. Bombing of Iran nuclear facilities because of a hatred of Donald Trump. Do you agree with that?
He's not necessarily wrong. I mean, you see a lot of folks who, by the way, are not seeing any classified information regarding the obliteration of Iran's nuclear capability. See a lot of people playing armchair quarterback who supposedly have all the insight. They want to undermine and undercut everything that President Trump is doing. Now, here's the good news. The American public sees right through it. They see what President Trump has done with securing the border. They see how peace is now breaking out everywhere. They see this big, beautiful middle-class tax cut bill that the president has gotten through. And so people realize that we're on a success track. They're even taking a look at their 401ks again and saying, the stock market is at a record level. How great is this for the American people? So I think the public gets it. And I think that many in the media, unfortunately, it's the TDS, the Trump derangement syndrome. They can't seem to shake loose, but the public realizes that.
I don't have any doubt that this has been the best 2.5 weeks of his presidency, including the first term. And I also don't have any doubt that there are a lot of journalists that instinctively don't like the guy. But when he came out, as we played earlier, and says that he hates the Democrats because he believes they hate the country, that sounds a little over the top.
But you take a look at some of the Democrats. I mean, let's take Ilhan Omar, for example. We saw her out there celebrating Somalian Independence Day. I don't think Ilhan Omar loves America. Not at all. You see it, even some of the whack job who's running for mayor in New York City, Moron Mamdani. This guy, some of the things that he's saying where we need to tax wider neighborhoods more than we do other neighborhoods.
He's a socialist, and he won the primary.
That is some crazy, crazy stuff. These people need mental help. They need real help.
The president called him a nut job, by the way.
Yeah, well, you know what? I mean, he's right. It's what can I say?
But that's why you have elections, and this guy beat Andrew Cuomo, and he's a Democratic nominee.
But I do think that at a certain point that I think folks who are on the left side of the aisle should be able to look at the successes that the president is having and saying, how great is it that we're Americans? How great is it that we can secure our border? We can do all of these great things to help the country. And just because someone's a political opponent doesn't mean that you necessarily have to hate them. I was very disappointed that no Democrats joined with President Trump in this middle-class tax cut
Wait
vote.
a minute, you didn't need Democratic votes.
But they
and
should
that's
have.
fine. The Democrats do that too.
But
it's called reconciliation.
But Democrats should have been able to realize, based on last fall's election results alone, that these are wildly popular policies, that we should be able to cut taxes for the middle class. We should reject these tax increases that were set to happen if President Trump didn't take this action. So these are some real common sense things that we should be able to come together and support. But thank goodness we have majorities in the House and the Senate. Strong leadership from President Trump.
The president says he'll now exempt illegal immigrants, illegal migrants at farms and hotels from ICE raids. And the media quoting some conservatives are saying that's a betrayal. Why are they more deserving than, for example, illegal migrants who work for trucking companies or work in factories?
Well, if you go back to the 2024 election, the president always said that he was going to have his focus on criminal illegals. That's where the focus needed to be. Secure the border. Let's make sure that we start deporting criminal illegals. A lot of people don't realize this. You already have about 1 million to 1.5 million illegals who are in this country already approved to be deported, to be sent back to the country that they came from, or to be sent back to a third country. That is where the president is focused, and we need to focus on the criminal illegals. And so it's very consistent with what he said on the campaign trail.
He's gone after Ivy League universities, elite law firms that employ people who once investigated him, and of course, as we discussed, the media. Isn't that retribution? Isn't that the opposite of what he was saying during the campaign, that success would be his retribution?
Well, not at all. So let's go and bifurcate the two for a moment. With regard to his concerns with higher education, you look at the anti-Semitic protests that were popping up all over college campuses this past year. Mm-hmm. You had these young kids or young adults who literally lost their entire graduations. They weren't able to attend classes. Things were getting canceled. I mean, you look at especially Columbia, you take a look at Harvard. The fact that these anti-Semitic protests were popping up all over, I'm glad that we finally have a president, and President Trump's going to stand up and say enough is enough. We have to make sure that colleges are safe for all students to attend without being discriminated against based on your religion. Now, with regard to the law firms, we've just sat through years and years of lawfare by some of these reckless left-of-center law firms who've targeted and gone after President Trump. We see the outright lawfare that went after him.
But it might be one or two lawyers at the firm.
But it continues today. If you're one of those partners at a law firm and you're authorizing and signing off on this lawfare based on political ideology or political affiliation, there deserves to be a reckoning.
All right, I got about a minute, Jason. Why does the president spend so much time taking questions virtually every day from those who he views as purveyors of fake news?
Well, two things can be true at the same time. One, he wants to make sure that this is the most transparent presidency that we've ever had. And by the way, I think that's a reason why people don't view President Trump as a politician, because he stands in the breach, he answers the tough questions, and he does it over. Hey, I worked for him for all three campaigns. Sometimes I'd wish, maybe we don't do quite as many questions. But you know what? This is why people love President Trump, because he'll take all comers. He'll answer anything. The contrast of that between what we saw from Joe Biden is night and day.
So you're going to get a headline now. Jason Miller says President Trump is not a politician. I mean, he's run for president 3 times.
No, but people view him as someone they can connect with. I mean, he's absolutely the billionaire populist that people realize he's the one who's fighting for them. But no, the politician is only worried about the next election, the next political fundraiser, things of that nature. That's not President Trump. He realizes we have a finite period to save the country. He's well on his way.
Jason Miller, good to see you. Thanks for coming on.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.